Hi, my name is Hello Auger, and my project is Public Perception of Evidence Before and After Education on the CSI Effect. I currently do not have a mentor, and I do not report to a lab. I am doing all of my studies by surveys at home. The CSI Effect is the notion that the fictional shows are affecting the juries in their decision-making in trial. And there is another theory that came about in my research called the cultivation theory, and that is the idea that people believe what is portrayed in the fictional shows as part of their own reality. I also have found that a current theme was the belief of a tech effect instead of the CSI effect, but I'll go into that a little bit more later. It's just the belief that with advancement in technology, the science protocols and procedures should also be advancing as well. The problems with the current research is that they lack what happens after people are educated on the CSI effect or the tech effect, and it is important to capture what happens after they're being educated to see if we can combat the CSI effect. And it is also important to remember what forensic science is. It's the mixture of law and science, and other techniques involved in the investigations are important other than just the high-tech equipment or scientific testing. The research that I have found, beyond frequency from Mater and Corbett, they found that with the more frequent you watch a show, the more confident you are to convict somebody as guilty. So basically, they just prove that through their survey that the more somebody watches a crime show, the more confident they're going to be in themselves and their verdict. Jury Still Out was a article done by Hayes, Smith, and Levitt, and they also had similar results where the heavier crime show watchers expected more evidence in trial in order for them to come up to a guilty decision. And they also found that the CSI effect is affecting the lawyers, criminals, and crime victims. And this could be a really big problem in our culture and how we investigate and deliberate in the jury. Shelton and Barak did a study in 2009 which discussed the tech effect, media effect, and the CSI effect and how they all correlate together. There are some differences, like how the media is influencing how jurors think or how they portray certain cases that are going on in the news that could also affect somebody or the jury's decisions. And Shelton's article just kind of explained how with advancements in technology there seems to be an expectation of scientific advancements as well, kind of like a correlation. In Mikado's study, she studied Portugal inmates, and this was pretty interesting because she found that the inmates believed that the shows, the CSI shows and crime shows, depicted realism in the USA and the UK, and they felt as though DNA databases could help protect their innocence and kind of help protect them from the cops from planting evidence and such problems like that. And they also thought that the shows potentially made them better criminals by knowing what evidence not to leave behind and kind of like what to clean up and how to commit the crime, how to kill. In Evidence Doesn't Lie in 2011, Harris kind of talked about the CSI effect and how it affects the unconscious mind. So the belief is that the shows are constantly telling people evidence doesn't lie, and that it kind of just goes into your subconscious and that you start believing these just through watching the shows. And another thing is that they kind of state that the juries are trying to prove somebody's innocence or whether they're guilty, just make their decision based off scientific certainty instead of beyond reasonable doubt. And I think this is due to lack of proper education on the forensic processes, and that is what also Harris said. Hayes and Levitt did another study, again with the cultivation theory, but they also discussed media's influence and how DNA was expected in most all cases, and that people believe that they're being educated through the fictional shows. Jenny Wise stated some similar things out of Hayes and Levitt. There's backlog due to the unrealistic expectations, and forensic science are expected to testify in court on why evidence isn't in trial and to explain the process of how evidence was collected and such forth. And it's just not, the shows, what's depicted on the shows is just not what happens in real life. And it's really causing some problems in the backlog. There's a lot more requests for certain things, like extra fingerprints and stuff like that, that may not be needed for the case. It might be irrelevant. And in Maricopa County in 2005, there was also a survey conducted, and it showed that forensic evidence is preferred over any other type of evidence, and especially DNA and fingerprinting again. But the problem with this survey was there was no link to the frequency of how much somebody watched a show versus their expectations of what kind of evidence they would want for deliberation. Shelton's study in 2008 found that the more educated you were, the less likely you were to believe that the crime shows were real, which is important for my study because with education, then maybe the CSI effect will diminish. Fact or Fiction from Smith and Stinson in 2011, they studied and they found that legal professionals are changing their behavior with how they collect information, and this could create a bigger problem in our culture. If you're collecting more information and expecting more evidence, then it's going to create a backlog, and it's just going to make it worse, and things are going to be held up even longer. And they also found that people thought DNA and fingerprints were more reliable, but it's not really more reliable pieces of evidence because it doesn't state whether you committed the crime or not. It just places you there. It's up to the investigators to prove the association. And in the article, should judges worry about the CSI effect? Lawyers were using their closing and opening statements to manipulate jurors and to constantly remind them of what evidence was lacking for the trial, or to remind them not to convict somebody unless it's beyond a reasonable doubt. And a similar thing was discussed in Managing the CSI Effect in the Jurors in 2012. They said to prepare for the expectations that the jurors are going to portray, and that forensic scientists should prepare to state why evidence wasn't collected and kind of explain why the procedures that were taken and stuff like that. But there's a fine line between manipulating the jury for defending somebody and convicting when there's no doubt. Donald Shelton, in his other study that he conducted, summed it up pretty nicely by stating, using highly scientific evidence to yield the doubt before convicting guilty, which means that people are expecting the high-tech scientific equipment to take away the doubt, and it just doesn't work like that in the investigations. It's important to take all the aspects of the investigations to prove somebody's guilty or innocent. The project is going to capture the media literacy and potential jurors, how the potential jurors perceive evidence, and their expectations of technology. I want to further the current research that has already been done and try to capture these things. One thing that hasn't been captured in the current research is media literacy and how people, how they gather their information and how they learn outside of school, and what they deem to be reliable sources. Do they believe everything on the news is reliable, or social media, or the internet? It's important to teach people what reliable sources of information are. I also want to try to capture what people think, or how people think of the evidence that is portrayed in trials, and what their knowledge is of the evidence, and how, if they understand how the evidence is used in the investigations. I also want to try to capture the people's expectations of technology, and how they expect the technology advancements to correlate with the scientific world, because it doesn't always exactly correlate 100%. And even though the shows are depicting really advanced high-tech equipment, it just is not realistic for today at this point. My hope is to teach people and the potential jurors about the CSI effect, and hopefully with the proper education we can try to eliminate the CSI effect that's in the trials in court. My surveys are going to be conducted on surveymonkey.com. I want to try to aim for participants that are 18 years or older, U.S. citizens, and not convicted of any crimes, therefore potential jurors. The demographic information is going to be open-ended, but the other questions, such as the TV watching habits, or what kind of shows they watch, crime shows, news, etc., and how often they watch it, those are going to be closed-ended. I also want to try to capture their beliefs of the reliability of evidence, and what types of evidence are reliable, and also if they understand what circumstantial and direct evidence is and how it's used in court, and what the rules of evidence are in the trials, and see if they understand what DNA and fingerprints, how they're used, and also how investigators can link certain pieces of information together. I just want to try to capture that with the potential jurors and see if they have a separate knowledge other than what's being depicted in their shows. I also want to try to see what their beliefs are on expert testimonies and expert witnesses when they testify. How does that affect their decision making for the verdict? I will try to eliminate bias by allowing a spectrum of answers in my closed-ended questions. I don't want to lead my participants to try to go towards one right or wrong answer. My participants will be anonymous. However, their answers will be tracked via their email, their username through SurveyMonkey, because if they want their answers, I want to be able to give them back. Survey A will be given, which will cover everything that I've already discussed. So I will give my participants the survey, and they will answer it. I will capture their original beliefs, and then I will give them an information sheet that will teach them about the types of evidence, again, direct and circumstantial, what roles of evidence might play in a investigation, technology and forensics, and how it's not exactly like the TV shows, or it's not as seen on TV. In my research, I discovered that the jury wanted the investigators to sweep the lawn for fingerprints. It just doesn't work like that. And I want the potential jurors to know that there's more to investigations than high-tech science equipment, such as motive, and there's different things that investigators look for. So after I give them the information sheet, I will give them another survey, which is going to be the exact same survey as Survey A, but I just want to see if their answers change. And I will analyze the results by seeing like what percentage of the answers change, and compare and contrast between the two different surveys. I hope that my study kind of helps the future of the CSI effect or the tech effect, whichever you want to call it. It's a problem in the courts, and I want to try to combat it through educating the potential jurors. So my idea is that if potential jurors are educated and then they have a competency test after they're educated, then this might help weed out the people who are just relying on the fictional shows for education. So this would help in the voir dire questioning as well, and it won't be so as extensive or problematic for lawyers or even the judges. It will just help the jurors be more competent in the actuality of forensic investigations, and hopefully it will help gear them to have more realistic expectations of what to expect in trial and what kind of evidence should be presented in court to come up with a verdict or a decision. I don't have any results at the time. I haven't started collecting my data. I will be doing that in the new year. And do you have any questions? Thank you for your time.